independently form opinions based on reason and logic. We're free thinkers. Let's see what the road to Concord with Professor Joe Bacanovic has on the lesson plan for today.
I don't understand this. I set this up correctly. Folks,
Yeah, we're
I
having some issues with
it's
Rumble. We
not
don't
on
know
our
what's going
side.
on.
It's not on our side. I threw YouTube back up, Charlie. People
All
can
right,
find us on
that's
YouTube,
fine.
Facebook,
Okay,
um,
yeah, that's
Twitch.
okay today because we will upload the show to Rumble after the show as long as things are working so that we can do that. So you can catch it on the replay. But sorry about that, folks. YouTube made some, or YouTube Rumble made some changes about a week or so ago,
I'm pretty sure
and
that was StreamYard.
well, maybe it was. I don't know if StreamYard, Rumble. Anyway, there were changes made that have messed up the way we do things, and we haven't been able to figure it out. I'll try to troubleshoot this some more
I
today, Joe,
the
and
only
see
thing
if
it
I
could
can figure it
possibly
out.
be right now is that where we threw it to Rumble, it didn't have the proper destination codes. But I checked that, Charlie. When I set it up today, I did it right.
Yeah, but remember, I told you there was some key or something
Yeah, we're gonna have to
that
look
got
at that. All right.
changed, and so I'm gonna try to see after the show, try to set up the channel again, delete all the Rumbles and re-add them. I hope I can get that done, and maybe that'll fix it. I don't know, but
This
sorry,
was
folks. We're not professionals at this. We're just a bunch of amateurs. So we'll do our best to figure it out and
this is
hopefully
irksome.
resolve it. Yes,
This
it
this
is.
is irksome. Hey, do me a
All
favor,
right.
throw a note in the Rumble show that we put up there telling people that we had that trouble and that they're
Right.
gonna
Yeah.
either have to catch the replay or go to one of the lives. Throw that note
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
there.
We got that in the lives. I'll put it in the permanents as well.
All right,
All right.
folks. Let's get this show on the road here. You go to roadtoconcord.com. That's where all your show notes are. That's where we put up links to everything every day. And it's just the roadtoconcord.com, one word. That's my old blog page. I've got a link to some of the stories I wanted to do today differently. I tried. It's just not going to help. It's not going to work out. I got a few stories. This one here is I just added it right as the show started. I'll have to add the link to your homework later. It'll be there after the show. But for now, in case you didn't notice, the Supreme Court just downgraded the insurrection of January 6th to trespassing, which leads me to a question. How does one trespass on public property? Well, the Capitol's not public property, Joe. Yes, technically it is. Technically, everything the government owns is public property. The only place where they have a right to control it are in specific areas that are technically weaponized or deal with national security. Because you're allowed to walk into unless it's a closed session for some weird reason, you're allowed to walk in to see what the Congress is doing. That's what the balcony, the above the Congress is for, so you can get in there and watch. So I'm not going to go through this story because, like I said, I just added it. But I just wanted to point out January 6th is no longer an insurrection. Which means it never was. Supreme Court said so. So the next time that the press, and they will, the media will still continue to show this as a quote unquote insurrection. Well, the Supreme Court said it isn't. Now, remember, Nancy Pelosi said that the court has gone rogue and we got to do something about it. What did she mean by that? In other words, the court is no longer under liberal progressive control. Not entirely. It might be under left-wing progressive control. Here you go, AI. You can get your hashtag out there. Another story I found, this is off the Blaze, how Woodrow Wilson normalized mass surveillance. This is by Kevin Ryan, June 28th, 2024. I'm going to go through this later because I just now saw it just about 10 minutes ago. I got to look and see what this one is. It'll get added to your homework later. But this is another really interesting story because we do know that Woodrow freaking Wilson is a large part of the problem that we have today. Which brings us to this. This is where we're going to start. Notice the source. This story is from NBC News. And it's a nightmare. Special counsel's assessment of Biden's mental fitness triggers Democratic panic. Polls have long found that questions about his age and mental abilities have plagued Biden's standing with the public. This story came out a while back. This is from February 8th, 2024. And it is in dealing with Biden's keeping of classified documents in an unsecured garage. He should have been prosecuted for that. He didn't get charged, and the Republicans didn't file articles of impeachment, which they should have done. If they're doing their due diligence and their duty as representatives of the people, they should have filed articles of impeachment over this. But they didn't, because that is a high crime. Keeping top secret documents in an unsecured location, that's a high crime. Washington, President Joe Biden sidestepped any criminal charges as the investigation into his handling of classified documents concluded, but the political blowback from the special counsel's report Thursday could prove even more devastating, reinforcing impressions that he is too old and impaired to hold the highest office. Special counsel Robert Hur's portrait of a man who couldn't remember when he served as Barack Obama's vice president or the year when his beloved son, Beau, died, dealt a blow to Biden's argument that he is still sharp and fit enough to serve another 4 years. In deciding not to charge Biden with any crimes, the special counsel wrote that it is in a potential trial, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury, as he did during our interview with him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with poor memory. It was tough enough for Biden to reassure voters about his health before Hur's report hit like a thunderclap Thursday afternoon, prompting members of his own party to question whether he could remain the nominee in November. Quote, "It's a nightmare," said a Democratic House member who asked to speak anonymously to provide a frank assessment, adding that, quote, "It weakens President Biden's electorally, and Donald Trump would be a disaster and an authoritarian." Oh, really? I'm going to stop reading this here. First of all, if you look at the history of the United States of America, authoritarian leadership has always come from the Democratic Party. You had parts that, well, it's always come from progressives. Let's put it that way. Progressives. Lincoln would be one of the first ones that comes to mind. Yes, Lincoln was an authoritarian. But that's a different show. Woodrow Wilson, Teddy Roosevelt to an extent, but definitely Woodrow Wilson. FDR. You have, now you have Biden, Obama. All progressives, but also George W. Bush. He was an authoritarian. What do we mean by authoritarian here? When you have a president who does things by decree, just signs an executive order, and he gets to do whatever he wants, that's an authoritarian. When you have a bureaucratic agency that gets to do whatever it wants with no judicial oversight, that's an authoritarian. We're going to revisit this subject here toward the end of the show when we talk about a ruling that was largely overlooked, a Supreme Court ruling that came out Friday it's been talked about, but I'm not sure the American public fully understand the ramifications of this ruling. I know I don't. Okay. And I've looked at it a little bit. I'd like to think I'm a little bit more up to speed on these type of things than most people, but I might not be. We'll get to it. The point here, though, is if you do a search, Joe Biden unfit for trial, you're going to get at least 3 pages of fact checkers. And that tells me, if you got to say it's fact check in today's day and age, I know that you're lying to me. Okay. I don't need you to tell me fact check, If you put fact check, that's a sign to me nowadays. I know how to read the media in the Russia, communist Russia, which I live in a similar time and place now, a very similar nation where the media is actually an organ of the government. So if you say a fact check, whatever you say next is probably 180 degrees out of line with the truth. The truth of this matter is this. This was an attorney making an assessment of the president who said he doesn't seem like he's mentally there. So we're going to recommend not charging him. Well, no, Biden was not found mentally incompetent. What you had is a special prosecutor, special counsel who said, I'm not even going to pursue this because it'll never get past that point of the mental competency test. If we had a doctor do this, oh, wait a minute, we have. The former physician to the president's, before the one we have now, the one that took care of Obama and W and all that, he has come out and said, just from what he's seen publicly, Joe Biden is not mentally competent. That's at least one medical professional. There have been others, but we're going to get to a few other things here in a minute. The point of the matter is, had we had a mental competency hearing, Biden would not pass. We all know that now. There have been a lot of excuses made for the debate last week, but Biden, this was not CNN's fault. This was not because he had a cold. This was not because he had been overprepared. Biden showed us exactly what his full potential mental capacities are, and they're insufficient for the position of the president of the United States of America. Period. End of story. Which brings us to another question, something I've mentioned before. Can individuals with dementia sign legal documents? And you go through this. This is a very long article. And look who it's from. It's from the Alzheimer's lab. And it goes over, Alzheimer's or dementia patients, very similar. You have to assess their legal capacities. This requires somebody other than the dementia patient to tell you he's competent, or people who have a vested interest in keeping the president in office. That would be his party, those people who are actually running the country by default behind his name, like his wife, who now we're seeing stories about how power hungry she is. And I wouldn't put those stories down, I wouldn't dismiss them. Another article, this is in your homework, but this is what happens when people with dementia commit crimes. And this goes over one particular case of what happened and how the law does not deal with this very well. The law will hold a dementia patient accountable for their crimes. It's a kind of gray area. So knowing this, why didn't the special counsel recommend prosecution? Whenever you put politics into the law, and you making political assessments about whether or not to prosecute a case, you have done great damage to the law. The law is supposed to be blind, supposed to be. If it's going to function the way it's supposed to, it's intended to function, it must be blind. And it even says, when we have a case where both sides have equal claim to adjudication, to judgment. In other words, we've got a case where maybe you got two victims. The Constitution says that the court is supposed to defer in favor of the weaker party, either financially or politically. In other words, you give the poor man the benefit of the doubt over the rich man. That's in the Constitution. Yes, it is. I know a lot of people would be surprised to find that, but that's there. And that's also, that principle comes right out of the law of Moses, comes out of the Pentateuch, first 5 books of the Bible. So we have a political influence into a case against President Biden. And they decide not to prosecute because of that. Well, first of all, they can't. But they should have referred it as being impeachable. And he should have been impeached. So what would have happened is the House might have impeached him. Probably not, because of political reasons. Let's say they did, and they send it to the Senate. The Senate won't prosecute. Well, they might, but they won't convict. Well, why? Well, first of all, the Democrats are always going to vote innocent no matter what. The Democratic Party has demonstrated time and time again. It's party über alles. Party over everything. It doesn't matter about the American people. It doesn't matter about the country. It doesn't matter about the rule of law, the Constitution. None of that matters. Party über alles. And even with the party, there's never really a set agenda. This is Alinsky and Machiavelli. All that matters is the issue of the day, the revolution. It's just constant revolutions. Why the left can never govern. They're not there to govern. They are a party constructed around the ideology of constant chaos. Progress. Have you ever known a progressive to define progress? Woodrow Wilson did. Woodrow Wilson said it's when we have the deep state, a new state that can be changed at a moment's notice without the pesky constitutional amendment process. You just reinterpret the law. Well, we're going to get back to Biden here now. We're tap dancing around an elephant in the living room, and that's the fact that this man is mentally incompetent. So why would his own party want him in office? Because it allows whoever's running this country to continue running the country. Unelected, unaccountable. How do you impeach whoever? You don't even know who's running this nation. Given the fact that Biden has been proven, not in a court of law, but by documentation that was found either through courts of law or through congressional investigation. We have evidence now, objective evidence that all sides acknowledge, that we have evidence showing that Biden is compromised both in Ukraine and in China, at the very least. So if you're compromised in Ukraine, why is this man allowed to do anything with the war over there? Republicans? Why hasn't he been impeached over this? We might be fighting a war, sending our money, our riches, and we're sending men and military weaponry into a war that we have not declared. We're fighting it by proxy, which goes against the spirit of the Constitution, constitutional restriction on declaring war. Nobody cares. But the man leading it might be doing it. We don't know. He might be doing it because he's being blackmailed, or to prevent himself from being exposed to even more criminal culpability. We have enough evidence to know that we should be investigating that. Nobody's doing that. Why? Well, Beck's people years ago now, when this first came out with the Ukraine and the quid pro quo story, his people did a piece on this, a 3-part piece. The reason that we're not going to investigate Ukraine is because it'll scarf up a whole bunch of Republicans as well. Our whole government will be in trouble. So we can't look there. What about the Chinese? Hey, good to see you, Chief. We got a friend of mine listening today. So what about China? Now, don't dismiss this. This is very important. We know that the Biden family is compromised to China. In fact, we have good reason to believe that the whole Democratic apparatus, Democrat Party apparatus, the party itself has been compromised by the Chinese. It goes all the way back, at least to Clinton. But do not dismiss the fact that George H.W. Bush, very sympathetic and very pal, buddy with the Chinese government, the communist Chinese, when he was in the CIA. Which probably means that George H.W. Bush was equally compromised by his dealings with China. What do I mean by compromised? What I mean is this: you cannot trust their dealings with the Chinese. In George H.W. Bush's case, it might be because he thinks, as a former head of the CIA, that he's still in control of running Chinese government somehow, or influencing their internal affairs. I think he may have also been counter-influenced without his ever knowing it. Arrogance and hubris can blind you to how, where you think you are manipulating the one party, that party's actually manipulating you. And where the Chinese are concerned, that is much more likely. The Chinese are masters at this. It's part and parcel of their culture. So we have a president right now, President Biden, who the whole world knows now, beyond shadow of a doubt, he is not mentally competent. Well, Joe, nobody's tested him. Yeah, they will not submit him to a medical evaluation of his mental competency. Why do you think they refuse to do that? You know, refusal to submit to a blood test when you've been pulled over for DUI driving. You can do that. It's your right to refuse. But what's going to happen? You're going to get accused of being guilty until you prove yourself innocent now. Why? Because most of us instinctively know that if you're accused of something this bad, like being mentally incompetent, you don't refuse to take a test. You take the test to prove you are competent. Trump did that. He volunteered to do that at one point. I remember him doing that. Everybody's like, well, he just thinks he can get away with it. He still has Alzheimer's, or he's still got dementia. Nancy Pelosi's out there saying that now. saying it's not Biden, it's Trump. And then she glitches right in the interview. Well, we know Nancy Pelosi has mental cognitive problems. We've known that for a long time. She's probably one of the several congressmen and senators on the Hill taking the Alzheimer's medication. Remember, that came out in a story a long time ago. I've mentioned that to you before, earlier in this show's history. See, you have to learn, if you're going to deal with these issues, you got to learn not to memory hole things that are important. You've got to be able to recall them. So what happens here is we've got people on the Hill in the Congress that we know are on Alzheimer's medication, dementia medication. They've been there for years. Now we got a president who's on it. Why? Why would you keep these people in place? Well, if you got a congressman or a senator on that's not mentally competent, his or her aides now run that office. So you have unelected people running that office. Well, what if one of them's Speaker of the House, like in the case of Nancy Pelosi? Pretty good bet that a lot of people accuse her of being alcoholic. Well, how do you know she's just not that doped up on medications? It'll have the same effect. And it's probably what's going on in her case. And they do that so other people can run the show. Well, what about Joe Biden? This is from the Daily Caller. It says White House aides reportedly confirm Biden exhibits classic dementia symptoms. Oh, what? This is June 29th, 2024. This is White House correspondent Reagan Reese. White House aides reportedly confirmed that President Joe Biden is exhibiting a common symptom of dementia, according to Axios. When Biden and former President Donald Trump met on the debate stage, the current president became the focus of Thursday's forum as he looked confused, appeared to freeze up, and stumble through answers. Amid the calls for the 81-year-old to drop out of the race, the Biden campaign and the president have worked to dispel concerns and downplay the performance as a rough night. Despite the damage control, sources told Axios that the president is dependably engaged. Really? Between hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., but is susceptible to verbal miscues and fatigue outside that time frame. My wife, Bibi, she's a medical professional of a sort. She been trained to deal with dementia patients. It's called sundowners. There's a certain point of day where they just click off. And just because they're mentally aware during the day, that does not mean that they have full control or of their mental faculties or full control over their cognitive abilities. Just because you might be able to talk coherently and make a few decisions, if your memory is faulty, like the special counsel said Joe's is, Mr. Biden's, then I can't depend on you to make complicated decisions for this nation, especially those that include national security, because you might forget something that I'm depending on you to know. You know, I'm your aides bringing you this stuff. I said, you know, Mr. Biden, here's the case. Here's what we've got. I don't have time to recount all of your history for the last 50, 60, 70 years. You're supposed to know this. You're president. But if he's forgotten and he makes a decision that is absent one of the most important pieces of the of information in the whatever it is you're discussing at the moment, he makes the wrong decision. The nation can suffer. Yes, sir.
And just a reminder, I mentioned this last week. This is the guy that has the button, or the monkey with the button, however you want to say that.
Yeah, but in this case, we shouldn't tease him. Not anymore. He's no longer who he used to be. If you go over... Mr. Delanoy says, here's a test for the voter. If you're on a small ship in a hurricane, would you want O'Biden as your captain right now? If you go through your homework, the one article that I'd put up there about can dementia patients be held legally accountable? The second one about the specific court case, what it points out is that in certain circumstances, and this is not rare, dementia and Alzheimer's, but mostly dementia, can cause normally law-abiding people to start exhibiting as a matter of normal behavior now for them, now that they're cognitively disabled, they start exhibiting routine criminal activity. So where before they might have behaved, now they start acting criminally. Now they give you excuses for this from psychology, but what I would tell you is dementia doesn't lie. So where before you knew enough to hide your criminality, now you don't, and you expose who you really are. But that's just my opinion of this. I'm not a medical professional, so I don't know. I've been around dementia patients and people who have suffered from that and Alzheimer's. I've watched it over the time as they degrade. And in a lot of cases, yeah, they can become really snarky and mean and ugly. And I have to wonder if that's because that's who they were their whole life. Okay, so chances are if I ever get dementia, most of y'all will never notice. Could be a good thing. Anyhow, that's just... So we're going to go back to Dementia Joe. This is from the Gateway Pundit, David Greisen, June 30th, 2024. Democrat Representative Jim Himes dismisses concerns about how foreign adversaries view Biden after the debate. There's a video in this story. And you can go through here. This is Democrat Representative, blah, 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 blah. This was on Face the Nation. This is, how do you think, he was asked this question, how do you think America's foreign adversaries view President Biden's performance on Thursday night? Brennan asked him. He says, this is a quote. This is what Himes said. I suspect that, pretty much everybody watched that debate and thought that President did not perform the way we would have liked to see him perform. Himes responded, quote, I'm not so cynical as to believe that the American people are going to choose a president based on a 90-minute debate, Himes continued. 90-minute debate. The debate just confirmed what we already knew, Mr. Himes. That's all. It was a confirmation. This is from a Twitter post, and you can watch the video here, but it says, Ask House Intel ranking Democrat. So this guy, Himes, he's a ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. How America's foreign adversaries are viewing President Biden's debate performance, Himes said, a 4-year record of setting a tone that the rest of the world says, wow, America is back to being decent again. Really? Really? Okay, first of all, folks, we know that he's got dementia now. That dementia or Alzheimer's, whichever. We know this. It was on display for the whole world for 90 minutes. There was at no point in what I've heard from, I didn't watch the debate, but from what I've heard from everybody, there was at no point that Biden actually seemed cognitive and in control. For brief glimpses, he might have made sense, but then he glitched and he mumbled and all sorts of things. And they've also got proof now that the moderators were giving him hand signs. He was being coached by CNN. That's coordination, folks. That's coordination between the Biden campaign and CNN. That's supposed to be illegal, but what the heck. So what we have now is we've got a dementia patient, and we are told that 4 years of record-setting tone. Okay, assume that we did good the last 4 years. Would I beg to differ. But let's say we did. Who was doing that? We don't know for sure that it was Biden. You're giving credit to a man who probably was not running this nation. By all rational standards, we should not assume that Biden has been running this country. Somebody else has been. Which also begs the question here. We have the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee says, wow, America's back to being decent. The nation we are right now is decent? Okay. From his perspective, I'm going to say that's true to him. What does that tell me about what the Democratic Party, or at least this Intelligence Committee chairman for the Democrats, what's that tell me he considers decent? Yeah, I hear you, Charlie. Shut up, Joe, before we get booted off of YouTube. All right, well, let's continue reading. Perhaps, this is the story, the author of the story, perhaps Representative Himes is in denial. No, he's not in denial. He's looking at this from a different perspective. He's looking at this from the perspective of those people who benefit from what's going on in the White House right now. After the debate, there was mass panic on numerous media outlets, and the Democratic Party had discussion of replacing Biden as 2024 nominee with another candidate. We have to take into account that this could all be kabuki theater. A poll conducted by YouGov the morning after the debate showed that 49% surveyed said that Biden should drop out of the presidential race. Himes is not the only Democrat politician that is defending Biden. Democrat Senator Raphael Warnock, Democrat Georgia, was on NBC's Meet the Press with Kirsten Welker early on Sunday and defended Biden, even though his debate performance showed his cognitive decline. Quote, "So that was yes to a cognitive test?" Welker asked Senator Warnock. Warnock says, "I'm not a doctor. It's not something, quite frankly, I've even thought about," Warnock responded. That's an admission right there that the Democrats that should be responsible for the care of at least their party, which is a corporation after all, a series of corporations, they don't even consider it. Well, before you say, well, that's proof that Warnock doesn't care or that he's not. No. Pull out Occam's razor. Is there another way to look at this? Yes. There's a different agenda at play. And from the perspective of these Democrats defending Biden, Biden is not a problem. He's serving his purpose, his function perfectly. Comment on the board from Ed, Illinois. All the highly placed folks defend him. Their futures depend on it. Yes, exactly. That's one of the things. That's another way of looking at it. It could be that their futures depend on it, that one, that's how they seize control and maintain it and their power and privilege, or two, this is how they stay out of jail. Well, given that the DOJ that would have to prosecute them is thoroughly corrupted by them, the more likely scenario here, if we pull out Occam's razor, the easiest, simplest solution is our government has been taken over by the descendants of Woodrow freaking Wilson's plan. And you now have a very real deep state shadow government, just like David Horowitz wrote about in his book, Shadow Party, in control of this nation that was not elected, that is not accountable to anybody but themselves. From their perspective, Biden is not a problem because he provides the puppet head, the figurehead that they can get everybody fighting Biden, Trump, Biden, Trump, Biden, Trump, Biden, Trump, DNR, DNR. The whole time, you don't see what's going on behind the scenes. They've got you caught up in the matrix. They're doing what they want to do behind the scenes. And because of MK Ultra and the way that they have programmed American people, if somebody yells, "Ah, the lady in a red dress," everybody goes, "Oh, you're just a conspiracy kook." And nobody pays attention to you. This is perfect for these folks. There's nothing wrong here. This is exactly what they intend to do. Now, they said that Joe Biden's cognitive degradation is not a problem for this country where other nations are concerned. And they dismiss the fact that Joe Biden has been thoroughly compromised by the Chinese. The whole Democratic Party has. And there are a couple of books on that shelf right over there that suggest the Republicans as well. Well, then, here's the next elephant in the room. Pacific on the edge of war as Chinese naval forces board and seize military boats of the Philippine Navy. All right. There's this little area that's in dispute. The Chinese claim it. It's called the tension erupted Chinese Navy. It's called the Second Thomas Shoal. And you can read this. This story is in your paper, in your homework, in your show notes. But this is not what I want you to look at. What I want you to look at is where the Second Thomas Shoal is. That little red dot tells you where this incident occurred. The Chinese seized, boarded, and Philippine Navy's, sovereign Philippine Navy's boats on territorial waters and land that the Philippines claim. They claim them. They claim this Second Thomas Shoal as part of their country. And then Palawan, which you're looking at right here. Let me blow this up as big as I can. Palawan is also part of, from what I understand, Philippines. So the Second Thomas Shoal is right there. Show me where's the nearest Chinese land. If not the Philippines, then Vietnam maybe. But how in the blazes does China lay claim to this area? And by what international law or right do they claim the right to seize the ships, board the ships of the Philippine Navy? and Coast Guard. And they seized property off those ships that they've refused to give back. Folks, this is a problem. Now, I can show you what one of the reasons they're probably doing this is. Oh, looky here. The Spratly Islands is real close to the Second Thomas Shoals, but look what's right above it. Same neighborhood, so to speak, if you're doing things in the Pacific. The Pacific's a big area. The Reed Bank oil fields. What do you think China's really after? Hold on there, Chief. We're about to get into something that's really going to, you're going to understand. Folks, we've got a classmate watching today, and I'm honored to have him here with us today. But he's going to understand this better than you and I. He was a chief warrant officer in the Navy. This is from Gateway Pundit. 3 key Pacific Island nations under duress from China's malign influence campaign. I've got to show you this picture here, folks. This is not to be dismissed. China wants Taiwan, and they're threatening to retake Taiwan by force. China is now boarding Philippines naval vessels in what is disputed territory that China has clearly no international legal hold to. But if you read this article, they are also messing with the political structure within the Palau Islands, which to us Marines, that's Peleliu. That's very famous to us. That's a really nasty battle in our history. The FSM Islands, which is right next door to Guam. That little oval circle right there with Palau, and FSM, Guam, and NMI, that's the Marshalls and Gilbert Island chain in that area. That was hotly contested in World War II. That's the doorstep to Japan. I know it might not look like it, but it is. Those are the areas that you need to control in order to control that western, that part of the Pacific. And now, down here, the Solomon Islands, China is heavily influencing that area of the world. This is where Guadalcanal is located. That was also part of the battle that the United States had to take. And now, New Caledonia. When you read the article, if you go read it, the Chinese are upsetting the elections in New Caledonia to the point where they're putting in political puppets that they control, which controls the governments in these regions. And when you read through this, what you're going to find is that the article doesn't necessarily say it, but it hints at it. The Communist Chinese, from the article, seem to be attempting a Clausewitzian double envelopment of this chain of islands by applying malign campaign against each one. And what they're doing is they're infiltrating the governments and they're taking over from within, just like the progressives took over the United States government from within, and then the state governments, and then the local governments. They're taking these nations over because these nations have, quote unquote, free democratic processes. And that's what's happening right now. Folks, let me explain what's going on here and why this is very important. New Caledonia, it's French. Historically, it's a French region from back in the colonial times. That island was key to World War II. If we had not contained and retained control of New Caledonia, we would not have been able to invade Guadalcanal. New Caledonia is the key point to the lines of communication to Australia, between the United States and Australia. Whoever holds New Caledonia can either defend or isolate Australia. Well, the Chinese are taking over New Caledonia. So if New Caledonia falls to Chinese control, Australia is isolated. The United States can no longer resupply and support Australia. Australia can be cut off and choked and taken largely without firing a shot. In World War II, we held New Caledonia and we fought our way up the Solomon Islands through Guadalcanal and all the way up through the Solomon Islands and into Papua New Guinea, which is where it says Port Moresby. Port Moresby is where that was the battle of crap. It's slipping me now. It was right before the Coral Sea. That was it. I'm sorry. That's Battle of the Coral Sea, which was, we were defending Port Moresby, which was key to our victory in Midway. This whole area of the world right here, if you want to fight over the Pacific, this is the area where you have to be. Like Chief Delanoy was telling us right here. The whole chain is the World War II buffer. Yes, that whole area is strategically important. China wants it. And what China is doing is also, they've been creating these man-made islands in this region of the world, in this part of the Pacific. So when they create that man-made island, that becomes Chinese soil, sovereign Chinese land in all 12 miles around it. Well, if you make a series of these islands, you can extend your right to claim parts of the seaways. I have told you before, China has declared that their goal is to take the 7 emeralds of the Pacific Rim. This is part of that strategic plan. If you think Donald Trump is about to be elected, you now have this is June. You got a 4-month, well, maybe 5-month window, 5.5-month window to move before Trump is in office again. So you got to get going. You've got to move. Now's your window to go. Just like in the Ukraine, this is Putin's window to do whatever it is he wants to do. If you pay attention to what's going on right now, Europe is in as much turmoil as we are. Some parts of the European NATO alliance are going far left. Other parts are going far right. The French just elected what they're calling a far right government, which when you read about it, it would have been a centralized government, middle of the road central, it would have been considered moderate a decade ago. But there's turmoil in Europe, and that's being partially fomented by the Russians. And Putin is starting to get into the area where if he wants to continue any type of military campaign anywhere, he's only got nukes left to fight with. He's hit the front lines of his military in Ukraine. And that's probably why we're partially fighting there, is we think we're disarming him in the process. We're taking away his military by a war of attrition in the Ukraine. No, what you're doing is you're pushing Putin into having to fight with nuclear weapons. And he's threatening that. And so are the Arabs in the Middle East. And you've got Biden in charge of all this with his finger on the nuclear button. Actually, whoever's behind Biden has their finger on the nuclear button. This is not fun, folks. Now let me show you this. Exclusive. Border signs in the Chinese direct illegal crossers from China where to go in the California. They direct the illegals crossers. What? Right here. This picture here. You see right here? That's a sign in Chinese. But it's not just in Chinese. It's also in Spanish and English, and it's an arrow, and it's telling them where to go. But this is the part that jumped out at me. And folks, there are a few of you that listen to this show regularly that understand what I'm doing right now. What I'm relying on my past and things I did when I was younger to help evaluate these stories to you right now. You're going to have to read between the lines on this one. But what I see here is NGO is using Chinese Americans at the border to assist these crossing illegally. These are non-government organizations. In other words, that's fascism. They are doing the American government's business in a way that allows them to claim. These are kites. These are called kite. This is, if it was an individual, if it's just an individual, this is how intelligence communities work. You call him a kite. He's not associated officially with your government, but he goes and does official government work. If he gets caught, they cut the string and he's a kite in the wind. He's expendable. The government will not defend him, will not come rescue him or her. They're lost. They're gone. They're dead. Well, this is a corporate version of an intel kite, the NGO, non-government organization. They do what the government can't legally do. But in a lot of times, they're funded. These NGOs are funded by the government and protected by the government. It's just if they get into a lot of legal trouble, the government says, hey, that's a private company. Make no mistake, this is part of the coordination to bring these people into this country. This is being coordinated by the United States government. I'll show you in a minute. I'm not wrong. But you go over this. This is the flyer they're handing out. Now, if you read it, it says, look, man, they're just looking for asylum, blah, 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 blah. It looks innocent. And then when you see the people, they're not all, well, let me see, where's that picture? This one doesn't have the picture of it. They're not all military-aged males, Chinese males, but a large part of them are. Now, here's another, and hold on to that. Hold on to that story we just looked at. Here's another one. China buying up land near strategic U.S. military bases. 19 American locations potentially compromised. Let's read just a few things here. Chinese land purchases near strategic military bases in the United States are causing even more concern about the amount of political and strategic power the country wields in America. Most of this is farmland, folks. This is farmland near these bases. And I'm going to get to that. Hold on. In recent years, entities out of the People's Republic have purchased countless acres of U.S. farmland, some of it near military bases critical to the Americans' national security. The purchases and other apparent infiltration of the American homeland underline an alarming fact about China's ability to project power. At least 19 of these foreign holdings are located in worrying proximity to domestic military bases. The important posts, including Fort Leonard Wood, Fort Irwin, the Yuma Proving Grounds, and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The last installation is perhaps one of the most troubling. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base hosts personnel assigned to the Nuclear Command, Control, and Communication Integration Directorate. The Directorate advises Air Force Global Strike Command and the Nuclear Command, Control, and Communications, Weapons and Systems technical architecture, and informs key decisions regarding investments in modernization. Blah, 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 blah. And it goes on to a few others. Do not dismiss what's going on in Yuma, because Yuma works in conjunction with Area 51. Now, here's where I'm going to explain. I bring in all these Chinese military-aged males who may or may not be part of the Chinese military. They go and they get U.S. government aid. Then, so now they're welfare recipients, which stresses the United States government, and it causes political unrest, and it gives China the right to vote in our elections through these people, because they're going to do what the Chinese tell them to do. If, I'm assuming, I'm playing conspiracy theorist here. When you're in the intelligence community, what we're doing right now is called wargaming, and it is a legitimate practice. So I'm going to send the military. They're going to go get all possible aid from the American government, because that stresses the government, puts financial stress on the country. And then I'm going to send them to the farms that I have bought outside of these military bases, where they will be armed, but to all practical purposes, they look like they're working the farm. And they're only a few miles from these bases. If I do enough of this, and I got a big enough little farm plot, I'm a couple miles from the base, and I have a full company of armed Chinese army personnel. So when the time comes, all I got to do is charge the base, and there'll be no advance warning. A whole company hits the base. The base isn't even on alert. Or I infiltrate. You think this is far-fetched? This is how the Stasi used to work. This is how, I can't remember the name for them, the Russian Secret Service, Spetsnaz. This is how Spetsnaz works. Go read the book Red Storm Rising by Tom Clancy. It's written in the 90s, I believe. In that, there's a special forces team of Spetsnaz, several of them, and they infiltrate Western Germany. And they set up as operating within the communities as normal groups of people, but they're all set up working real close to the communications facilities within Western Germany. And when the Russians invade, these Spetsnaz teams take out a lot of the communication facilities, TV and radio, but they're also close to some of the key communication facilities for NATO. And they succeed in certain areas. It's the exact same pattern, the same style that I just described to you, which is exactly why I see this threat in what's going on with the Chinese infiltration in this country. It's because it mirrors the way that the communists, the Russian Spetsnaz teams would operate. This is, oh, geez, the potential here is way too blaring. And we've got a president who can't do anything about it, because if he tries, the Chinese just start leaking how he's all in trouble, and him and his buddies and his family all go to jail, because it would be so blaring of information that even the corrupt DOJ could not ignore it. So they would put them all in jail, take their money and property away, and then just put another puppet up there. You'd end up with Kamala Harris as president. Somebody who could very well be president and then have her finger on the button, and she got there by putting her feet in the air. And I know it's vulgar, but that is literally how that woman got there. And don't forget, Kamala Harris is the same person who knowingly and willingly put an innocent man on death row in California to further her political career. We've covered that story on this show before. She did do that. So she was willing to kill somebody to further her own personal career. What's the difference between 1, 100, and 1,000? Once you're a murderer to gain ground and you're already a individual prostitute for power, literally, what's left? What would you not do? So, folks, these threats are very, very real, and they're not the only ones we have. Let me show you something else. This is I did a search on Gateway Pundit. I just typed in Chinese elections, and then I get this story. CISA and AT&T pushed connecting elections to FirstNet. In other words, all your election reporting is connected to FirstNet. Mark Zuckerberg paid FirstNet's bills. FirstNet infested with hackable Chinese components. What? You can't steal an election, Joe. Oh? Well, Dominion machines are unhackable. Yes, sir.
It's not who votes that counts, who counts the votes that counts.
Thank you, Joseph Stalin. Yes, exactly. This is what I'm getting at. So here's the deal. Dominion, first of all, has now been shown that they are hackable. That's been proven in our court systems, the state court systems, and foreign countries that no longer want Dominion. Even Puerto Rico's kicking Dominion machines out of there because it makes it hard for... Anyway, this story, this one here, this one tells you that AT&T and this other CISA, they say, let's start connect all the reporting systems for all our voting in this country through FirstNet. And then Mark Zuckerberg, he's totally innocent. He paid FirstNet's bills. He's got nothing to do with the Chinese, only that, the social credit system that's going on in China right now, he and Google designed it and implemented it as a beta test for the United States. What are you talking about, Joe? Where have you been? You've got to start paying attention to this show. We brought the receipts on that story already. That's in the past. I'm not going to recover the past, but that was in the show. We brought the receipts. We showed them to you. That's a slam dunk. That's known. It's proved. So we've got a guy who's got connections to China himself, who's all about election fraud because he's been paying for that through Facebook. He's an NGO. Facebook, folks, God, I can't believe this is, I'm going to go here. Charlie, I need you in here real quick. Google, Microsoft, and Facebook are all products of DARPA. Tell the audience who DARPA is. In a nutshell. Who are they?
The Defense Department created the internet.
Exactly. So the internet, Microsoft, and Facebook, and all of those are... YouTube is DARPA too, folks.
Well, yeah, they're all part of this. And DARPA... Means, you might not hear DARPA today because the military has this thing about changing names all the time. So, you're going to...
Very progressive
You're
of
going
them.
to change it, to something else. But if you think that the internet is not monitored... Well, there is this place out in Utah that they're really having problems with because they're using all the water and stuff to cool...
Oh, no, Charlie, that's global war using all that 1.5 billion gallons.
Yeah. It's monitoring every flipping thing
this
that's
show
going on
is being
on
put
the
up.
internet. Your cell phones are being monitored. Your TVs are monitored. Every flipping thing goes into that computer server. And
so, Charlie,
but anyway,
who in the military would control all these things? Just Central Command or the intelligence community?
Oh, Intel, of course. Yes, they're
Which is
and who's CIA in charge of who's in charge of our Intel community today? But we've covered that too.
Yeah, we're not allowed to cover these things. Okay, thank you, Charlie. But folks, this is serious stuff because on this search, and remember, FirstNet is hackable. The Chinese can hack it, and if you can hack into that system, they can change anything they want. Which then gets you here. Remember I told you to hold on to that NGO? Act Blue, the online clearinghouse for democratic action. Election Watch Peter Brenninger exposes Act Blue finance laundering and Chinese NGO influence in U.S. politics. So the Chinese are using NGOs as foreign operatives. And a lot of those NGOs that they're using are also tied to the United States government because China owns a large part of our government's allegiance. This story, Chinese communist-connected organizations are crushing RNC investment in swing states, et cetera, et cetera. And these are all stories about how the Chinese are messing with our elections. So, the Democratic chairman of the House Intelligence Committee says that Joe Biden's dementia is not a threat overseas. I think we might need to get rid of that intelligence chairman. But now here's the thing. He may not be lying. He may not be delusional. He may be telling you the truth out in the plain open. You're not looking at it from his perspective. If you are a global internationalist, a communist intern or an internationalist, whatever the heck Jimmy Zinker calls them, this is perfectly fine. There's nothing going wrong here. This is all according to plan. Fun times, right? We're going to go to the break now. When we come back, we're going to discuss the Supreme Court ruling that overthrew the Chevron deference case. Oh boy, you don't want to miss this one. This could be the death knell to Woodrow freaking Wilson's dream about the deep state. We'll have to see. But we'll talk about that when we come back. 6 minutes. See you then. Make sure you're back in your desk. Bye. Real quick, before we move on to the next subject, let me remind you also that I think it was under Clinton that I know Clinton sold the Chinese the information necessary to make their submarines quiet and to get their satellites into space. Before Clinton made it okay for the military to sell that technology to China, their submarines were loud as they could be. Their rockets were not getting into orbit, et cetera, et cetera. $250,000 campaign donation to Bill Clinton, and they got all that technology. But they also, if I'm not mistaken, sold the rights, that they sold the port of LA to a Chinese company that was just it's an NGO. It's a front company for the Chinese Red Army, the Communist Red Army, for the Chinese Army. So you've got one of the most, or at least at one point, you had one of the most important ports on the West Coast under the control of the Chinese government. We do this everywhere in this country. We literally sell ourselves. I believe there was a man who said that they're not going to have to fire a shot. They'll overthrow us from within and even sell us the rope to hang ourselves, right? Was that Brezhnev or Khrushchev? It's one of the two of them. So I got an article I got to share at some point about how the West is committing suicide. Here's the next article. This is from Just the News. And if you don't visit this webpage on a regular basis, this is worth it. Excuse me. This is from John Solomon. He personally puts this up. And he's a former journalist for the alphabet community out there. And he thought that, thank you, Mr. Zinker, it was Khrushchev. Appreciate that. Jimmy's our resident expert on the communists, and he studies them in more depth than I do. And I'm not joking. He does know the Russians and the communists. He understands them better than most. But John Solomon was fired by the Alphabet News networks for being a real journalist. He was what we would consider left-leaning, but still, he's intellectually honest. The title here: by shooting down Chevron deference doctrines, SCOTUS restored democratic rulemaking, experts say. The subtitle is, the ramifications of this decision are going to be felt for decades, energy analyst David Blackman said. The decision removes a considerable amount of power from the administrative agencies, who will now have to provide evidence before issuing decisions. Now, real quick, before we look at this story, I want to show you something that John Solomon does that I love. See, you have up here at the top, you have the article. Then you can do dig deeper. And this is where he gives you kind of like what we try to do here. He gives you more background on the subject. This is awesome because he'll let you just dig as deep as you want into this subject and to the story. So now the story itself. The Supreme Court last Friday, issued a ruling that will limit federal agencies' sweeping regulatory power. Libertarians and conservatives have hailed the decision as increasing individual liberty and reducing the power of bureaucrats over Americans' lives. Bureaucracies ruling the country. Hello, Woodrow freaking Wilson, because that was his dream, folks. In a 6-3 decision, the justices vacated a 1984 doctrine known as the Chevron defense, or deference, which allows federal agencies broad latitude in interpreting laws when Congress hasn't provided specific guidelines. Folks, do you understand what they just said? The Chevron deference, the Supreme Court in 1984 said that a federal bureaucracy can not only be a legislative body, but also the judicial body. They can be their own judges, their own interpreters of their ordinances. And since they also execute them independently of the executive and independently of the president, these agencies are literally dictatorships. They make the ruling, they adjudicate it, and then they execute it. They're the executive, judiciary, and the legislative all in themselves. How are these bureaucracies never been shut down by the by SCOTUS? Why hasn't the president ever shut them down? Folks, this is what Woodrow Wilson, Charlie, we've got to return to that essay. We've got to read that essay This Friday, we're going back to Woodrow Wilson's essay, and we might read the whole thing. Folks, don't miss Friday. The present is driven by the past. So we're going to continue. Under the doctrine, if Congress has granted an agency the general authority to make rules with the force of law, where was the authority in the Constitution for Congress to defer its authority to another agency? That effect creates a fourth branch of government. They don't have the right to do that. There's nothing in the Constitution. Anyhow, if the Congress didn't clearly articulate it, the Supreme Court and the federal courts have generally deferred to the agency's implementation of that general authority. In other words, they gave the agency the right to write the law and be the judge over that law. David Blackman, energy analyst and author of Energy Absurdities, called the High Court's decision an earth-shaking ruling. It's going to be much, much harder for federal agencies to invoke major, incredibly complex regulations that are clearly outside the original intent and scope of the governing statute, Blackman just told Just the News. Now, it's long overdue. This is in your homework. I'm going to go to the next one. This is just from the Federalist. I haven't read it. I found it at the same time I found some of the other stories this morning. It's not in your homework yet. I'll get it put up there for you. But it says the Supreme Court strikes a blow to the administrative state, overturns Chevron doctrine. And this is just another from the Federalist. It's another view of what's going on here. Then we have this one. This is from the Gateway Pundit. This is where I want us to, we'll read through this. Then we're going to have a discussion on this real quick. This is breaking. Chevron is gone. SCOTUS rules unelected bureaucrats do not have the power to create laws. That's not exactly what this ruling said. In a landmark decision, the Supreme Court has overturned the long-standing Chevron doctrine, fundamentally altering the balance of power between the judiciary and federal agencies. Notice how they tacitly admit the federal agencies are a fourth branch of government. They're under the executive, but the president doesn't really control them. This is how our country, the federal agencies are the deep state. Anybody who ever asks me, who are the they, Joe? Right there. Your federal agencies, unelected dictators, unelected, unaccountable. You can't impeach these people. You can't get rid of them once they're there. And where do they mostly come from? The Ivy League schools. Friday. If you missed that class a year or so ago about Woodrow Wilson, Friday, folks. Friday. Be here Friday. Continuing. The ruling, which came in the case of Loper Bright Enterprises, etc., et al. Versus Raimondo, Secretary of Commerce, et al., marks a significant shift in the balance of power between the branches of government. The Chevron doctrine, established in 1984 case Chevron USA Inc. versus Natural Resource Defense Council, has long been a source of contention. It granted a deference to federal agencies in interpreting ambiguous statutes, effectively allowing unelected bureaucrats to make laws through their regulatory actions. Well, not only did it allow them to make laws, it allowed them to change the law from day to day by reinterpreting it differently each and every time. And the courts wouldn't step in. However, by a 6-3 majority, the SCOTUS has now declared that such power is unconstitutional and goes against the principles of democratic governance. Chevron is overruled, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in his majority opinion. Courts must exercise their independent judgment in deciding whether an agency has acted within its statutory authority. Chief Justice Roberts emphasized that the role of interpreting laws and making policy decisions should rest with elected representatives in Congress, not with unaccountable agency officials. The ruling has been hailed by critics as regulatory overreach, as a victory for the separation of powers and the rule of law. SCOTUS blog reports, Chevron, Roberts explains, defies the command of the Administrative Procedure Act, the law governing federal administrative agencies, that the reviewing court, not the agency whose action is reviewed, is to decide all relevant questions of law and interpret statutes and provisions. It requires a court to ignore, not follow, the reading the court would have reached had it exercised its independent judgment as required by the APA. Chevron's presumption that statutory ambiguities are implicitly delegations of authority by Congress to federal agencies is misguided, Roberts explains, because the agencies have no specific competence in resolving statutory ambiguities. Courts do. In other words, they gave two powers to these bureaucracies, the power of legislation and the power of judiciary. Well, since they also execute it independent of the presidency and the DOJ, they also have the power of the executive. That's a dictatorship, folks. They were making the bureaucracies king. Roberts notes that today's decision does not call into question prior cases that relied on the Chevron framework. That holdings of those cases that specific agency actions are lawful including the clear action holding of Chevron itself, are still subject to statutory stare decisis despite our changes in interpretive methodology. Stop right there. Roberts is wrong. This is why I don't trust him. I'm not a lawyer. I don't need to be. Not for this. I have studied the rule of law. I've studied the Constitution. I have studied the theory of law, philosophy of law. I understand the bedrock upon which Roberts stands better than he does, apparently. It says I can strike down Chevron deference, but that doesn't strike down the ruling of Chevron deference. I can fornicate, but that doesn't mean that I've given up my virginity or my chastity. That's what he's saying. They overturn the ruling in Chevron deference, but they're going to leave the effects of Chevron deference in place. Slavery is illegal, but I'm going to let you keep your slaves. That's what he's saying. You know what he's really defending here? Stare decisis. That's where the judges make a ruling, and every judge afterwards is supposedly bound by it and has to defer to the judge's ruling rather than the Constitution before it. So how does he say that he can overturn? He voted to overturn Chevron deference in violation of stare decisis, but now he's saying that all those other cases that are based on an unconstitutional ruling have to be upheld because of stare decisis. I guess all things make sense when you first take a visit to that man's island in the Caribbean and then come back and rewrite your case with Obamacare in crayon. I don't know what they have on him, but here's the case. Here's the deal, folks. He voted to make this ruling, the original ruling, the Chevron case, it was unconstitutional. Yes, it was. He's right. Which means every case that has proceeded since then, relying on that ruling, is equally unconstitutional. So why are they not doing that? Simple. Do you have any idea of the chaos that would follow if the court had said that everything based on Chevron deference is now null and void? Oh my gosh, folks. That's 20 years. No, let's see, 84, 94, 04, 14, 24. That's 40 years of bureaucratic law that would be gone. But do you know what else this applies to? Presidential directives that carry the rule of law. Yeah, you got to keep reading. The decision comes under concurrence of Justice Thomas and Gorsuch, who added that their perspectives understanding the constitutional necessity of judicial independence and statutory interpretation. Justice Neil Gorsuch, the son of former Environmental Protection Agency administrator, wrote separately to call Chevron deference a grave anomaly when viewed against the sweep of historic judicial practice, according to CNN. The 1984 decision, he said, undermined core rule of law values regarding the promise of a fair notice to the promise of fair hearing, adding that it operated to undermine rather than to advance reliance interests, often to determine detriment of an ordinary American. In other words, it took away your right to a fair trial and hearing. This is a massive win for the Constitution. This is a massive win for the American people. Leftist Lawrence Tribe wrote, Chevron is now overruled. The administrative state just died. This is a leftist writing this. The imperial judiciary joins the imperial presidency, relegating Congress to a secondary role except when it legislates with unrealistic specificity and foresight. Now, he's complaining because he says now Congress has to be very, very specific about everything they write. Yeah, they've always been that way. The Constitution said they were supposed to be specific. This is a left-wing admission that they've been ruling by vague decree this whole time. And what Congress was doing was abdicating their role. They've been nothing but kabuki theater. They are Hollywood for ugly people. When you graduate your Ivy League school, if you're ugly, you go to politics, where you get to pretend to be a celebrity in Washington. where you get all rich and pretend to have power, but actually the power all resides with the agencies, because you deferred all that to them. They make the laws. You just pretend to make laws. That's what this is. And the leftist is complaining about it. He's like, oh my God, you took our ability to be dictators away. Well, yeah, that was the point. Says Chevron, this Lawrence Tribe says Chevron is now overruled. Okay, we read that. For far too long, the Chevron doctrine has allowed DC bureaucrats to go unchecked. Today's SCOTUS ruling restores decision-making powers back into the hands of lawmakers who answer to the American people, not unelected Biden bureaucrats, Senator Cynthia Lummis wrote. And that's also in a Twitter quote. Goodbye, Chevron deference. Hello again, Constitution. Unelected bureaucrats cannot make the law, and our courts can once again protect the American people from them. Senator Mike Lee. Ron DeSantis weighed in, writing, the Chevron doctrine distorted the constitutional separation of powers and helped create the unaccountable, bloated administrative state. This decision is a necessary corrective to decades of wayward constitutional jurisprudence, but it is, by itself, not enough to restore the proper role of the federal government's three branches, which will require Congress to take its obligations under Article 1 of the Constitution more seriously by using its lawmaking and spending authority to rein in the federal bureaucracies. In other words, DeSantis is saying Congress has been put back in their role they tried to abdicate and hide from, and now they have to be responsible for it. Oh, well, we can't have that now, can we? Here's what to make of this. If we lived under the rule of law, which we don't. Even now, we still don't. First of all, the Constitution does not grant Congress. It says Congress shall have the sole authority to make law. What Congress did is said, yeah, but we're going to give some of that authority to the bureaucracies, which are technically under the executive. And then we're going to let the bureaucracies make law. And we're going to give them vague directives that they can just interpret any way they want. Hello, Woodrow freaking Wilson. You know, it's a living document. What it said yesterday isn't what it says today, and it won't be what it says tomorrow, because we're going to reinterpret it according to the times of the day. So it all depends on the meaning of the word. What is at this moment. I'm being flippant to make a point. That is exactly how this has been working all this time. So when you filed a suit against the regulatory body would say, oh no, the courts can't hear that. They're in charge of this. So the courts would have to defer to the agency's interpretation of the law. So I bring this up from NCIS. It's no pin here. You say, okay, regulatory agency, we caught you. And the Supreme Court comes in and says, let's see what you did, regulatory agency. Show us what you did. And the regulatory agency says, look, we were perfectly within the law. No pin here. And the Supreme Court turns around and looks at the person who's been totally victimized by the regulatory agency and says, sorry, no pin there. They said so. They didn't commit a crime. This is literally allowing the criminal to not only commit the crime, but also be the DA and decide whether or not they committed a crime. That's what's been overturned. But now we're being told that in the process, we've overturned that ruling. So from now on, the courts can properly adjudicate these things. And from now on, the regulatory agency supposedly has to show clear explanation of why they're doing things. They're still making law. Now all they have to do is write it out specifically, and they're still making law. The Constitution specifically forbids that. And supposedly, Congress had the authority to, without an amendment or without rewriting the Constitution and getting 3/5 of the states to accept it, gave their regulatory power to the executive. So you have the king and the legislature in one body. And in this case, the Supreme Court came along and said, oh, but we can't adjudicate those laws. The regulatory agency gets to. That is an entirely new system of government. And that is how you live right now. The Constitution is a facade. So when I tell you the Constitution's dead, stop giving me pushback. I'm telling you the truth. And I just explained it to you. The Congress working, it was progressives, folks. This was all coordinated. Progressives. And I'm going to explain this in great detail Friday. And I'm going to bring the receipts and the smoking gun. We're going to go back to Woodrow freaking Wilson. We're going to read it. And we're going to show you line by line. This is what he said. This is how they did it. This is what he said. This is how they did it. And all this supposed New World Order conspiracy crap that everybody they like to dismiss you with, we're going to prove that it's not a theory. It was a conspiracy, and it's been done out in the open, and they have succeeded. So if you think for a second you're voting your way out of a successful coup, oh, that's a special kind of stupid right there for all of us. Because I was there for a long time too. I thought we could vote our way out of it. No. You are into the land of the Jefferson option or surrender. Those are our only choices. And unfortunately, we are not the people necessary to successfully and righteously exercise the Jefferson option. So stop talking to me about fertilizing the tree of liberty. I don't trust you. I don't trust myself to do that. I don't trust any of us anymore. We have strayed too far from what Adams said was necessary to do that correctly. We are no longer a religious and moral country. We are reaping what we deserve. You know what the only middle ground of these two to surrender or the Jefferson option? There's only one middle ground, and it'll get you to violence, because the beast will not surrender you willingly. The only middle ground is something else we've done on this show that people laugh at me for. Secession. Secession's the only middle ground. Who do you see out there talking about that? What governor is talking about that? Seriously talking about it? Not a one. I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer here, but that's what these stories show us. If we don't get a hold of the border now and start, I'm afraid that the optics on this are going to be absolutely horrendous. But we have got to start rounding up the people that came into this country illegally over the last 20 years and sending them home. Or as that one person said, send back them. Yeah, that was the Mexican president. That's how he handles their illegals. Send back them. That was on Rush Limbaugh's show. He used to like to quote and play that clip, remember? Mexico doesn't want the illegals, but we have to take all of their illegals. We're going to have to start send back them. Children and two. And the only way you're going to successfully execute that campaign is to get a handle on the media. And now through our own liberty, to get a handle on the media is to violate the First Amendment. To get a handle on social media is to violate the First Amendment. So if you're a principled individual, you are in a literal military style catch-22. You're danged if you do, you're danged if you don't. We've been warned for decades. We didn't listen when we still had time. You are not going to save this, ladies and gentlemen. The best you can do is get real about preparing to survive in whatever ends up coming out of this mess. The Overton window has moved so far left that we think the Ted Kennedys and people like him back from the 80s, we think they're centrists now. We call JFK, he'd be a far right winger today, but he was a liberal Democrat in his day. The Overton window has been moved to the left. Normalcy bias has Charlie, this is what I mean. I don't know what else to say anymore. For those who have been with the class a length of time, you probably see it. Why do I need to keep telling you? You already get it. And for those who don't see it, I don't think there's anything I can say or show you that's going to open your eyes anymore. We are literally living in a world of Ephesians 6. It's a spiritual war. You either see it or you don't. There's no middle ground to that. But most of us live in the material world and we can't see past it. So we think things are much more complicated than they are. And we think things are much more nuanced than they are. And Joe, you always see in black and white. There's a lot more gray. I've said this before, I'll say it again. When it comes to right and wrong, moral right and wrong, things are always black and white. And if you're seeing gray, that is a sure sign you are on the wrong side of right. Gray is how our hearts justify lawlessness. I don't mean our feelings. I mean this heart, the Hebrew heart, the intellect, the will, your reason. How do I say that? Well, the heart is deceitful beyond all things. You know, the Bible tells us it's infinitely deceitful. Your emotions are not deceitful. Your emotions are what they are. They don't deceive you. This is what deceives you. The devil owns the fence. Yes, Mr. Toller, he does. Thank you. We rationalize our... Justice Roberts, we overthrew this unconstitutional decision, but you still need to go by the ruling that unconstitutional decision created. Okay, we're all for chastity, but we're all going to run out there and we're going to fornicate like a bunch of drunken sailors. And somehow or another, you've overturned something? Why? Well, we got to protect stare decisis. What is stare decisis? Oh, well, that's making laws. You know what he is? I don't want the agencies making law. I want the courts to still be able to make law. That is exactly what Roberts said. Yes, sir.
They don't want to give up their power.
Yep. And that's what stare decisis is. Stare decisis is making law from the bench.
Yep. Yeah.
And it's not constitutional. It is not constitutional.
No, that isn't either.
Just like the bar is not constitutional. The bar is a private organization that tells you whether or not you can make money acting as a lawyer. I can act like a lawyer all I want. I can function as a lawyer all I want, as long as I don't charge you for it. As soon as I charge you money, I have to have the bar's permission. Since when? And the judicial system has just accepted this garbage. Since when? Show that to me in the United States Constitution. Show that to me in a state constitution anywhere where that is delegated. You think I'm wrong? There was no bar back with the founding fathers, not like what we have today. Not like that. Essentially, all the bar should be is to say, yep, you have a law degree from this and this college. Recognize that you went and earned your doctorate of law. That's all it should do. And maybe adjudicate malpractice or unethical accusations. But it shouldn't say that you have to be a member of the bar in order to practice law for profit. That's another NGO. You're now governing an essential function of the judiciary, of one of the branches of government. And it's nowhere in the Constitution or most state constitutions that I'm aware of. Does anybody see just how far we have strayed from what we were supposed to be? And I don't know how to help anymore. I'm frustrated, folks. I'm frustrated. It shouldn't be this way. This is injustice. This harms people in ways they don't even recognize. And you can't help them either because they don't see it.
Who can fight the beast?
Exactly. Exactly. Mr. Quest says, divided the nation falls. Nothing new under the sun. Right. A house divided cannot stand. And we are divided. Oh, boy, are we divided.
Boy, are we divided. Yeah.
We're balkanized as well. Yes, Mr. Keeley, Yahweh and Yeshua can fight the beast.
Yeah.
Charlie, I'm talked out. That's what I had for today. You have anything you want to add?
Well, yeah, like John was saying in the comments earlier, you got to prepare physically and spiritually for what's coming, because these next few months have got me really, really concerned.
Historically,
Because
folks, historically,
because
this is when the assassinations start.
yes, this I saw someone sent me a little animated video on Facebook, and it in the end it showed somebody with a firearm, and it had Biden, and they're talking about, his debate performance. You know, that I mean, that's the kind of stuff that's going on, and and I told the person, I said, "Don't be surprised if that actually happens." I mean, I'm not saying that this should happen. Don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating this, but with the evil that's going on in society today, those are the types of things that could happen to solve this dilemma. And if I'm correct, the evil forces that are in control today could use those methods. And it may be something innocuous. You know, we've talked on the show before about the Clintons and how many people met their end in questionable ways. Oh, well, they had a car accident, or they, this or that.
Or heart
Uh,
attacks,
it
very
heart
convenient heart
attacks,
attacks.
things like that.
And don't forget, you can be a Supreme Court justice that dies on a Democratic, retreat area in their hotel from a heart attack, and we will never do an autopsy on him.
Yeah.
Scalia.
So, yeah, so just keep in mind that, because there's serious problems right now. This election coming up could be the ignition to all out civil war.
Did you
I
see
hope
this?
it's not.
This is from the Gateway
Oh
Pundit.
my.
Riots break
Oh
out in
my.
France. Antifa is vandalizing stores after a massive right-wing election victory. Why do I want to play this today in conjunction with America? What do you think happens if Trump wins?
Yeah. Oof.
What do you think
It'll be
happens if
horrible.
Trump wins the election, but they hand it back to the Democrat again?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It doesn't matter who wins this election in the fall.
We are in a catch-22.
Either way, it could be the match that kicks off an all-out civil war. Yeah, well, I'm saying that in hopes that it doesn't, but I mean,
You understand now why I say your options are surrender or.
Yeah.
Because the only way to avoid violence that I see right now is to surrender. It's just that most people won't understand what surrender looks like. Surrender at this point is to continue with the quid pro quo.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Folks. Anyway, I don't know. I'm talked out, Charlie. Anything else I say from this point forward will get me in trouble on YouTube.
Yeah, we probably already are. And I may
Maybe
have
even
contributed.
on Rumble.
I may have contributed to that. So if we do get banned on YouTube again, I apologize. But
oh well.
It is what it is.
Yep. So let's wrap this one up.
All right.
Folks, first of all, we apologize for the trouble with Rumble. We will do everything we can to make it work Wednesday. Wednesday, I don't know what we're talking about for Worship Wednesday. I have no idea yet. Yahweh will give me something between now and then. I know he will. He always does. Friday. Be here Friday. I'm serious. If you're interested in politics and you want to know where all of this really started, where it got its real start, I mean, got traction, not the ideas, but where it got traction in the physical world, be here Friday. I'm going to bring the receipts and the smoking guns. You're going to understand why we say Woodrow freaking Wilson. And this time we're going to go even further than we did the first time we did this. This time we're probably going to read the whole essay. It'll be lengthy because Woodrow Wilson liked to talk more than I do. Loved to hear his own voice more than me. Liked to use lots of big words when he could have, in sentences where he could have used one simple word. But we're going to go through it, and I'm going to explain it to you as we read it. We're going to show you in the real world how it was put into play. So Friday will be a big show. I don't know what we'll do Wednesday, but we're trying hard to help, to edify, to educate in a way that has an impact in your life. If we succeed, if we are doing that, please hit the thumbs up, the like buttons, please. That helps the show. It also tells Charlie and Natasha that they're appreciated and their efforts they're rewarded only from you guys endorsing the show. Yes, sir.
And we have to ask for follows because as we've found out with Facebook and things like that, we need followers so that they don't kick us off the platforms.
Yeah. And to be honest with you there, if you tune in here more than once or twice, if you're semi-regular, I don't know why you wouldn't like the show and follow it. Liking the show doesn't mean you like my opinion. It just means you like the show. If we are doing something that helps you in your world and you think it'll help others in yours, share it. Spread the show. Send them links directly by a private message or a text message or an IM or something. Send them a link to a specific show. Ask them to watch the whole thing. Warn them about me in whichever way you feel fit, according to who you're sending it to. Ask them to pay attention to the material, not the host. It's not about me anyhow. It's about all of us learning to better understand our world in a way that helps us to live our life more in concordance with the way we want to live, to be the people we want to be. And then if you do like the show and you don't want to see it go bye-bye, or you want to see us better able to reach others, if you're in the financial position to do so, please go to the donate page. We ask for a cup of coffee every month, $5 a month. Sign up, donate to the show. It does go to the show. And if you can afford it, buy a cup of coffee for somebody who can't. You know, it doesn't have to be $5. If you can afford more, we appreciate it. We do. It goes directly to the overhead of this show. Nobody here has made a penny from this show. We haven't. Matter of fact, BB and I, my wife and I, pretty much funded the first year of this show out of our own pocket. We're not trying to make money. We're not trying to make Joe a big deal. The only reason that you get me instead of Charlie or Natasha is because both of them are they're capable of doing it. They just don't want to. I'm the idiot that doesn't care what people think about me. I'm better suited to be the front man. It's not because I have any better knowledge or understanding or anything. It's just because I've got a thicker skin than most and I'm better suited to it. I'll take the arrows better than most people do. That's the difference between being a Marine and being an Army doggy. Wink, wink to a few of you in the class. I'm not disparaging you guys. I know that you'd be right there with me. I understand that. But this show is not about personal aggrandizement. I really don't want an audience of 1 million people, because that'll mean that we are no longer delivering the message we're trying to deliver. What we're trying to show folks and teach folks and help folks with is always going to have a small audience. It's going to always be a minority, because the remnant is 1/10 part. I know that I am supposed to teach the believers of the body. They're not going to be a whole lot of you. I know that from reading my scriptures. So I've learned not to expect a huge audience, which means those of us in a position to do so that like and appreciate this show have to help. So if you've given us that cup of coffee every month, that's all I ask. That's all I ask. We know the numbers who watch. If everybody did that, we'd be good. Or covered everybody. If it was covered, we'd be good. We wouldn't need another penny from anyone, and we can do everything we need to do. We'd be good. We'll get there one day. You always got this. Hold on a second. Let's see what this is. Sorry, I got to make this one private, but it was posted publicly. It says, Mr. Holt says, Joe, I've been having trouble with my 12-year-old daughter. She's been sneaking around our firewalls on the internet and watching shows like Has Been Hotel, a musical cartoon that is set in hell and celebrates sex, drugs, and transsexual behavior. It has her head all messed up. How this show was ever greenlit, it's beyond me. Oh, brother, I feel you. I don't know what to do with little girls. I was blessed to have little boys, because you can deal with little boys differently than you can little girls. And as you know, I'm sure you know as her father, if my sons had done that, well, let me tell you, that's easy to deal with. I would have jerked their chain so hard, their great grandchildren would have felt it. But you can't do that with a little girl. That'll have the opposite effect. But as far as what she's into, it's demonic, brother. Straight up demonic. And the reason it's approved is because the demons have control of your media through Hollywood and the people who run our entertainment industry and mediums in the news as well. I was thinking about this, and I'll end with this commentary before we go to the sign off. I want all of you to think about, if you're over 40, if you're not old enough to remember the middle 80s and the early 90s, earlier would be better. But if you can't remember TV in the early 80s, this isn't going to make a lot of sense to you. You're going to think I'm full of it. The TV shows we used to watch were so, especially in the earlier 80s, were so regulated. There's a TV show named I Dream of Jeannie. Barbara Eden. She was not allowed to show her belly button. And it was shown at one time that when she moved certain ways, her costume would slide down and her navel would be exposed. They glued her costume in place so her belly button would never be seen. She was not allowed to be seen in the other character, Major Healy's bedroom with him. And if she was, it had to be in a very innocent way. And then her bottle was never allowed to be left in his bedroom overnight. And we were never allowed to cut the scene without watching her leave the bedroom. So if she winked out, at that time, she wouldn't just wink somewhere. You would see the smoke exit his room. It was so stringent in the morality that you couldn't even imply that she was doing something improper with Major Healy because they weren't married. Now, go forward into the middle 90s with Hill Street Blues. It's less than a decade. It's about a decade, little over a decade. And we have nudity of men and women on primetime TV, Hill Street Blues. Now, granted, mostly all they shown was bare buttocks of two of the main characters. But they were in bed, making love, having sex, whatever. And at various times, they showed nudity on mainstream TV. In 15 years, less than 15 years, we went from being that stringently controlled in the morality in our media to showing things on TV that would have gotten you put in jail 15 years earlier. Now what they show is the cartoons. I grew up loving cartoons, Scooby-Doo and Johnny Quest and things like this, where the artwork was, compared to what we have today, the computers could give us great animation like the video shows for video games, but we don't do that. We draw cartoon characters for our children. When I look at them, they look like something out of one of Pablo Picasso's paintings of the bombing in this war on Spain. I mean, it's horrific. The cartoons themselves, the characters look horrific. Stupid. The dialogue is dumb. It is trash. So we've gone from what used to be, Scooby-Doo, teach your children to solve mysteries, and it was always a bad guy teaching moral codes, to teaching the exact opposite. And remember, I shared a meme with you one time. Before Satan can get you to embrace him, and he can walk down the street totally nude and nobody will see him, he has to desensitize you to all the things that he causes, that his actions in our lives cause. That's how the LGBT community, that was part of it. That was part of this whole thing. This is all planned and orchestrated. It was human agents doing it, but it wasn't the humans that had the idea. My wife and I are watching a show on Paramount. I think it's a CBS movie. It's called Evil. If you have not watched it, go watch it. It's meant to make you poo-poo the spiritual war, but it has the opposite effect to those who have spiritual eyes, who have eyes to see and ears to hear. It literally shows you how the demonic forces work through the human agents to bring their will into physical reality. That's what Stranger Things is all about. Now, I like Dr. Heiser. Dr. Heiser thought he saw the gospel message in Stranger Things. Where the heck was he at? Stranger Things shows you how evil enters into this world through human hands that are under the influence of spiritual beings. Because the messianic figure in Stranger Things is a female, not a male. And Dr. Heiser had no problem with that. Making a female into the messianic figure is literally the definition of Antichrist because it denies the Son. It's not that there are anything wrong with women. I'm not being sexist. It's not the point. It destroys the imagery and the message and the symbolism, which destroys the essence. And once you've destroyed the essence of what protects you, decay follows. And decay leads to destruction. That's where we're at. And I just got the message for Wednesday. Charlie, you want to be in class Wednesday? I'm going to give you your sermon.
Yeah, that'll probably help me a lot. And I just want to say, I had a daughter, and I don't want to go into too much detail because she would kill me. But we had problems at certain points, and the one thing that I did have was a good relationship with my daughter where, she could trust me to talk about things and knew I wouldn't share them outside of our conversation and stuff. And I hope you have that kind of relationship with your daughter, because you need to talk about these things, and you need to, do it in a way that's not too judgmental. Listen to the whys and stuff, and do your best to steer in the right direction. I did that, and luckily it worked out for me, and she's doing really well. But yeah, you gotta nip that in the bud if you can.
And with that, I will keep you and your daughter in my prayers, Water Jug.
Absolutely.
I promise you that one. I will. Okay, folks, that's all I have. We love each and every one of you. We thank you for being here. I now know what the Wednesday's class is going to be. I'm not going to tease it. I'm not going to tell you. If you didn't pick up on what I just said, be here Wednesday. Oh, this is going to be a different class. Charlie will be in the background taking notes furiously because I'm going to be teaching on his sermon that he's been working on. So we will see all of y'all Wednesday, I hope. If not, make sure you're here Friday. Water Jug, Yahweh bless you and your family, brother. Hang in there. He's got this. Just stay on top of it, my man. We'll see you Wednesday. Shalom.